Your new story starts from here. John's Days 2021. Reconnect with everyone.
Hello everyone, a privilege to be here and celebrate Joe's Days together with you. My name is Donnie Prakoso. I'm a senior developer advocate for AWS covering ASEAN. And in my field of work, I'm specialized in the distributed system, especially microservices and event-driven architecture. And I usually give talks surrounding those topics, and occasionally I also give talks about deep research. But for today, I'm going to share with all of you something different. So for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to quickly share with you how I use AWS technologies to improve my productivity. And the key takeaway of this session is to give insight into how we can get things done by leveraging technology, and also to give you ideas on how you can unlock many possibilities to improve your productivity by building the tools by yourself. Quick introduction of myself. For the past 17 years, I've been building services and solutions for various industries ranging from banking, telco to startups. My specialization is microservices, event-driven architecture, and all sorts related to containers and serverless to machine learning. And if at some point you have questions related to those areas, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And this is the point of discussion for today. Today, the main discussion is all about my daily activities and challenges and how I utilize AWS services to improve my productivity. I will also use this opportunity to share how I heavily use AWS CDK and AWS Step Functions to build various tools. And I will show you a step-by-step demo on how I built my development machine and publishing articles with AWS serverless services. As a developer advocate, my main job is to help to share with fellow developers how they can utilize technology to achieve their objective. And this diagram summarizes my internal workflow. First, I learn about new technologies. It can be containers, serverless to big data and machine learning. Then once that I learn these pieces of stuff, I synthesize them into a content. And most of the time, I give a talk based on the content I created and share it with fellow developers. Now, after I'm done with giving talks and sharing the knowledge, I usually get feedback from them from the survey, or even a direct message on my LinkedIn or Twitter. So, same like all of you, I encounter many challenges on a daily basis. And to get all this through, it's never been an easy process. Sometimes I stumble into problems that make me stuck for a couple of days. And usually, I have to do series of steps that take time and effort to get the job done. Like for example, in most of my talks, I always create a demo. So there are two challenges here. First is how I build application faster and how I can minimize the development issue on my laptop. And how can I easily publish articles to share my knowledge? These are just a few of the challenges that I encounter daily. And at some point, I know that I need to build tools that are suitable for my workflow and as an answer for all of these challenges. And the story on how I built productivity tools with AWS begins here. The first tool that I built years ago is how I set up remote coding with AWS. Like I mentioned previously, if there is something new at AWS, like new services or features, that is something that I need to learn. If that's something that I do think will be beneficial for developers in my region, I'll create content around that topic. And all of these activities require me to do experiments. And most of the time, I will need to code and develop a demo as a proof of concept. And the problem is, doing many experiments in developments require me to install language runtimes, or compiling some application, or installing libraries or other dependencies. And to help me move faster and have a different environment, I built my reusable remote development machine with AWS CDK and EC2. AWS CDK is an open source software development framework to define your cloud application resources using familiar programming languages. To simply put, with CDK you can provision AWS resources using supported programming languages. Now, the concept is pretty simple. I use AWS CDK, which is amazing by the way, to create a construct to build an EC2 with all configuration that I need including applications dependencies, runtimes, and everything that I need to do development, and I need to access the remote development by using SSH. Now, the reason why I use CDK is that I need to reuse the construct to create not only one, but multiple EC2 for the development environment. So let me guide you through how I use CDK EC2 to build a remote development machine. So in this demo, I'd like to show you how I use and organize an Amazon EC2 instance for remote development. I'm using AWS CDK for all resources provisioning, and that makes it easy for me to replicate to other instances in case that I need to have another development environment for specific case, like having Jupyter Notebook to do machine learning tasks. Now let's evaluate our CDK application. First, I define a couple of configurations for EC2. Here I'm using M4 Large and Ubuntu Server. Then I choose to use existing VPC, and some things that you need to note here is that you need to pass the environment configurations such as the region and also the account ID, so CDK can retrieve the default VPC and incorporate into your application when you try to deploy the application. Okay, moving on. Next thing is that I define the security group. Now, as I need to have this machine accessible, I have to attach it with an elastic IP. And I don't like to expose many ports on my remote development machine, and I always strict to use SSH port. And whenever I need to access internal resources, I have to do SSH tunneling. Next is the EBS. Now, one thing to note about this remote machine is that it's not meant to have a persistent storage. It just need to be there temporarily. The reason why, because at some point I will need to destroy this EC2 and rebuild it again. Okay, moving on. Then we have the EC2 instance. Get all variables that we have defined earlier and adding user data. And the user data is pretty much configurable, and I change it from time to time. Sometimes I need to work on Go or Python or Ruby. Sometimes I need to work on database or Jupyter Notebook. So the configuration really depends on what I need to do. Next, I mentioned about associating the machine with the elastic IP. And lastly, the removal policy. I always choose to remove everything once that I don't need it. Alright, let's try to run our CDK application. It looks good. Let's try to deploy it. And fast forward, what we have now is an EC2 instance. And now I can try to log in. I can try to run Python, Go, or even Docker. Now, the way I do coding is normally via NeoVim. So the NeoVim is pretty much configured to my setup. And sometimes I also like to explore something new like Visual Studio Code. And the best thing here is that I can access all the files using the remote plugin, so that's quite convenient for me. Now, there are a few things that I added here. First is that I occasionally need to access those files, especially when it comes to images or static assets. And here, I'm using the SSHFS to mount the remote folder on my EC2, so I can access it on my local Mac. And also, I can destroy this EC2 machine in case I need to have different experiments or completely different development environment. So yeah, this setup works pretty well for me. And now I don't need to rely on my laptop to do development, especially when I need more powerful development environment. And if something breaks, I can easily rebuild by launching another EC2 development machine. Now, the next tool that I built recently is a publishing platform. For the past years, whenever I create content, it always comes with writings. And I have dozens of articles sitting in my laptop. But I'm always struggle with publishing. Most of the static site generators require me to define the metadata using front matter. And I have to do git commit and push even for small updates. I really want to have something easier and more effective. And for this, I heavily use Step Functions. AWS Step Functions is a serverless function orchestrator that makes it super easy to coordinate AWS Lambda Functions into a workflow. And I realized it's time for me to build my own static website generator that suits my workflow in order for me to publish my articles using AWS Functions. So let me show you how I done that. So for the second demo, what I want to show you is how you can use a series of AWS serverless services to build, compile, and deploy your own static site. Let me walk you through the diagram to help you understand how everything works. First, we have Airtable. Airtable is an external service that helps me to consolidate all data in a database. So one reason why I use Airtable is that I don't want to build any CMS to build a website. And all I need is easy access to the data, so I can modify, make any updates, delete or add posts. Then the crux of this tool is AWS Functions. AWS Functions is simply one of my favorite services because that I can coordinate various of tasks using Lambda Functions, and I can also decouple each domain of the system, but still having ability to create an end-to-end workflow, which is super awesome. This step function is pretty basic. I have 5 Lambda functions. First Lambda is to populate all data from Airtable and normalize them into a standardized structure that could be processed by the rest of Lambda function. Then these step functions will do one parallel process which involves 3 Lambda functions. First is to generate an index.json that will be the list of all posts and pages for my website. Second is to generate all pages like about page, talks, or anything that could be navigated from the main page. And lastly is to generate all posts. Then all of these processes will be merged back and sent to another Lambda function to update Airtable posts so it will update the data. All posts and pages, including static assets, files, and images, are going to be deployed into Amazon S3, which already integrated with CloudFront as CDN. Now to start this workflow, I configured 2 triggers. First trigger is the integration with Amazon API Gateway, so whenever I made a call request to API Gateway, it will then trigger the step function workflow. The other trigger is the CloudWatch events to trigger step functions workflow every 3 hours. And this way, I know that my website is up to date with the latest data in the Airtable, and in case that I need to rebuild, I just hit the API Gateway endpoint. And I deployed all this tag using AWS CDK. Okay, so let's jump into the action. In the Airtable base, I have 3 views, and all of views are defined by the status. First base is all records that I filter out as draft. The other base is all records that I filter as to publish, which means all records that needs to be processed and updated. The last base is all records that has been processed and have status completed. Now let's try to create a record. Let's say that I'm going to create a post titled Joe's Day Rocks, and I put some description into it. And I write some things in Markdown format. I set as post type and set the status as to publish. Now, if we go to the to publish view, we will see that there's a record that we just created. And now, if I trigger the endpoint that connected to Amazon API Gateway, it will trigger the step functions to start. And now, let's go to the step function dashboard. You can see that now we have the workflow up and running in step function. And after a while, we see that the process is completed. And that means that everything worked fine. Now, if we go to the website, we can see that the post has been published. And this is a really simple workflow, but I found it really improved my productivity when it comes to publishing articles. So these 2 use cases are just a few of the tools that I've built to help me to improve my productivity. As a builder, we can use the technology to help us achieve our objective. And throughout the years of building tools for myself, I learned few valuable lessons. First, define what you need and work backward. Second, find your own workflow and be obsessed with optimizing the process. Use CDK or any infrastructure as code as much as you can because it helps you to have a consistent deployment. And then, step functions is an awesome service to start small and allowing us to expand later. And lastly, with an exception of EC2 for my remote development, serverless computing is just perfect approach to build productive tools. Not only is cost efficient, but building tools with serverless surely minimize all record operations. I even joke to myself, if I cannot make my tools run on serverless, that's probably a bug. So that's all for today, and thank you very much for joining me in this session. Hopefully this session provides you with insight on how you can build tools by leveraging AWS services and inspire you to be more productive and get the job done. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Once again, thank you. I'm Donnie Prakoso, and see you next time, Joss.